The bullet tore through the helicopter's fuel line 3 seconds before the RPG hit. Carissa Bennett saw the warning light flash red, heard the pilot scream, "Brace!" and then the world exploded into fire and spinning metal. The Black Hawk tumbled from the sky like a broken toy, slamming into the mountainside with a force that should have killed everyone inside. It almost did. When Carissa came to, she was alone. 6 bodies around her, all dead. Her left arm was shattered, bone jutting through skin. Her leg was twisted wrong, blood everywhere. And through the shattered windscreen, she could see enemy fighters already moving toward the crash site, weapons ready. She had maybe 2 minutes before they reached her. 2 minutes to decide. Stay with the dead and join them, or crawl into the forest with compound fractures and try to survive alone in hostile territory with no extraction plan. Carissa chose to fight. For 18 hours, she evaded enemy patrols, treated her own wounds with one working hand, and kept moving, despite injuries that should have left her immobile. She killed 3 enemy fighters who got too close. She survived on rainwater and willpower, and when she finally made radio contact, her transmission was intercepted by a Marine Recon team 30 kilometers away. The radio crackled. "Vanguard 2-3, this is Reaper 1-6, we're coming to get you." Their commander immediately countermanded the order. "Reaper 1-6, you are not authorized for rescue operations. Complete your primary mission and return to base." Staff Sergeant Mike Hendricks looked at his team. 4 Marines who'd just heard an American operator bleeding out in enemy territory, abandoned by command because the risk assessment didn't work out on paper. Hendricks switched off the command frequency and keyed his radio to Carissa. "Vanguard 2-3, sit tight. We'll be there in 2 hours, and when we arrive, you better be ready to move because we're fighting our way out together." What happened next became the kind of story that gets told in hushed tones, about a wounded medic who refused to die, about Marines who disobeyed orders to save a life, and about a running gun battle through enemy territory that proved some people are worth risking everything for. Before I show you exactly how 5 Marines and 1 wounded operator shot their way through an entire enemy battalion, drop a comment telling us where in the world you're watching from and hit subscribe. Because this story will remind you that real warriors never leave anyone behind, even when everyone says it's impossible. Now, let's get into it. 18 hours. Earlier, the helicopter went down hard. 1 second, Carissa Bennett was checking her M4 carbine in the troop compartment of a Black Hawk flying nap of the earth through a mountain valley. The next, an RPG streaked out of nowhere, and the world became chaos. The explosion, the violent spin, the screaming of engines tearing themselves apart, bodies thrown against bulkheads, equipment becoming projectiles, the brief weightless moment before gravity reasserted itself with brutal, devastating finality. Then impact. Metal shrieking as the helicopter hit the mountainside and tumbled. Carissa's head slammed against something hard. Everything went black. She came to with her ears ringing and blood in her mouth. The helicopter was on its side, smoke pouring from the engine compartment. Through shattered windows, she could see tree branches and gray sky. The smell of aviation fuel and burning electronics filled her nostrils, mixing with the copper tang of blood. Her left arm was pinned under debris, part of the bulkhead that had torn free during the crash. When she tried to move it, white-hot pain exploded through her nervous system, making her vision blur and her stomach heave. Looking down, she saw bone jutting through torn flesh. Compound fracture. Bad. Her right leg was twisted at an angle that sent alarm bells through her medic training. Not broken, she could still feel her toes, but badly damaged. Torn ligaments, maybe worse. But she was conscious, she was breathing, and that meant she had work to do. "Sound off," she managed, her voice coming out as a croak. She cleared her throat, tasted copper, and tried again louder. "Anyone conscious? Sound off." Silence, the kind that's worse than screaming. Carissa forced herself to assess with clinical detachment, despite the panic threatening to overwhelm her. She was a combat medic specialist, part of a quick reaction force being inserted to evacuate wounded from a fire base under attack. The crash had scattered equipment throughout the troop compartment, but her aid bag was still strapped to her vest. She checked her team methodically, knowing what she'd find but needing to confirm. The pilot and co-pilot were obviously dead, their seats crushed by impact with a boulder during the crash. The crew chief was slumped in his gunner's position, neck bent at an impossible angle. Sergeant Marcus Webb, her team leader, was partially ejected through torn fuselage. No pulse. Specialist Danny Ortega was pinned under equipment, eyes open but unseeing. Private First Class Sarah Chen's body was still strapped in, blood pooling beneath her seat. Carissa was alone. 6 people on this helicopter, and she was the only survivor. She heard voices outside, distant at first, then growing closer. Not English. The local dialect she'd been briefed about. Enemy forces were already moving on the crash site, drawn by the pillar of smoke rising like a beacon. With her right hand, the one that still worked, she reached for her aid bag and pulled out a tourniquet. Her left arm was bleeding steadily from the compound fracture. Not arterial, but enough to kill her within an hour if she didn't stop it. She applied the tourniquet above the injury, cinching it tight with her teeth and working hand. The pain spiked to levels that made black spots dance in her vision, but the bleeding slowed to a manageable seep. The voices were getting louder. She could hear boots crunching on debris, people calling to each other as they surrounded the crash site. Carissa made her decision. She couldn't defend this position. The helicopter was a death trap. She needed to move. Using her good arm and working leg, she hauled herself toward the torn fuselage. She grabbed Webb's M4, a fully automatic rifle with a mostly full magazine, and pulled 2 spare mags from his vest. She took his radio, his water, his sidearm. From Chen, she retrieved more ammunition and a smoke grenade. From the crew chief, she took the survival kit. Then she pulled herself through the torn metal and dropped into the undergrowth beyond. Pain exploded through her leg when she landed, but she bit down on it and started crawling away, using her good arm and leg to drag herself into denser vegetation. She'd made it maybe 50 meters when the first enemy fighters reached the helicopter. Through gaps in the undergrowth, she watched them approach. 8 of them, armed with AK pattern rifles, moving with confidence. They searched the wreck methodically, confirming kills, stripping equipment. It took everything she had not to engage them. 8 targets, wounded with limited ammunition. The math didn't work, but they didn't move on. 2 fighters started organizing the others to establish a perimeter around the crash site. They were setting up an ambush, expecting rescue forces, which meant Carissa couldn't stay. She needed distance. She began crawling, moving slowly to avoid creating obvious disturbances. She'd made it 200 meters when she heard the shout. One of the fighters had noticed her blood trail. Carissa rolled behind a tree as automatic fire erupted. Bullets tore through foliage where she'd been seconds before. She brought up Webb's M4, braced it against the tree, and waited. The fighter came crashing through the brush, weapon up. Carissa let him get within 10 meters before she fired. 3 controlled bursts, 9 rounds total. The fighter dropped, his AK clattering against rocks. More shouting. The rest of the enemy element was responding, moving to surround her. Carissa checked her ammunition. 20 rounds in her current magazine, 2 spare mags with 30 each. 80 rounds total against 7 or 8 enemies who knew this terrain. She pulled the smoke grenade, popped it, and threw it toward the enemy voices. Gray smoke billowed. Under its cover, she forced herself upright and started moving. The M4 was clutched in her right hand, her left arm hanging useless, wrapped in hasty bandages. She moved in a shuffling run limp that sent agony through her leg but covered ground. Behind her, the fighters shouted orders, coordinating their search. They knew she was wounded, knew she couldn't have gone far. Carissa kept moving, through a stream bed, up a rocky slope that left bloody handprints on boulders, into thick trees where undergrowth provided concealment. She found a natural depression concealed by fallen logs. It wasn't perfect, but it was defensible. She collapsed into the hide and immediately began improving it, arranging branches for concealment while creating firing ports. The enemy was still searching, but they'd lost her trail at the stream bed. She could hear them spreading out, but they weren't close enough to be an immediate threat. She checked her injuries. The tourniquet on her left arm needed adjustment. She loosened it slightly, allowing some blood flow while maintaining pressure. The arm was swelling badly, bone fragments visible through torn flesh. Her leg was worse. Every movement sent pain radiating from knee to hip. Torn ligaments, definitely. She splinted it using branches and paracord, immobilizing the joint. Equipment check, Webb's M4 with 80 rounds, his Beretta M9 with 15 rounds plus one chambered, one smoke grenade, her aid bag with limited supplies, 2 bottles of water, a survival kit, not much, but enough. The sun was setting. Carissa pulled out the radio and conducted a systems check. It had survived. She extended the antenna and switched to the emergency frequency. But she didn't transmit. Not yet. Enemy forces could triangulate radio signals. She settled in to wait for darkness, conserving energy, listening to the enemy search pattern. Night fell. The fighters set up camp near the crash site, posting sentries. Carissa counted at least 12 now. Reinforcements had arrived. She waited until 0200 hours when human vigilance is lowest, then keyed her radio. Any station, this is Vanguard 2-3. I am wounded and immobile in grid November Kilo 7426, requesting immediate extraction. Over. Static answered. Then, Vanguard 2-3, this is Reaper 1-6, authenticate Hotel Victor 3-7. Someone had heard her. Authentication confirmed. Hotel Victor 3-7, Reaper 1-6, I've been alone for 18 hours. My team is KIA. I'm hit in the leg and left arm. I have limited ammunition and enemy forces are closing on my position. The response came. Vanguard 2-3, we're coming to get you. Hold your position and stay off the radio unless absolutely necessary. We'll be there in 2 hours. 2 hours. Carissa checked her watch. 2:15 hours. If they could reach her by 4:15, they'd still have darkness. For the first time since the crash, Carissa Bennett had hope. Staff Sergeant Mike Hendricks moved through the darkness like a predator. Behind him, his 4-man recon team matched his pace. Corporal Jake Morrison on point, Lance Corporal Tommy Diaz covering their 6, and Navy Corpsman Ray Valdez in the middle. They'd covered 12 kilometers in 90 minutes, moving fast through terrain that could hide threats in every shadow. Reaper 1-6, this is Overwatch, the radio crackled. Be advised, we cannot authorize extraction at your current location. Recommend you complete primary mission and RTB. Hendricks had expected that. Overwatch, Reaper 1-6, roger your last. Be advised we are already committed. We'll advise when package is secure. Reaper 1-6, you are not authorized. Hendricks switched frequencies, cutting off the transmission. He'd deal with consequences later. Morrison's hand went up. The team froze. Through night vision, Hendricks saw 2 enemy sentries on high ground. Hendricks signaled Morrison and Diaz forward. The 2 Marines moved like shadows. The kills were silent. Both sentries dropped without sound. Morrison and Diaz dragged the bodies into concealment and signaled clear. At 0345 hours, they reached the coordinates. The crash site was visible 300 meters east, surrounded by a dozen enemy fighters. But Carissa's position was separate, hidden in terrain providing natural concealment. Hendricks keyed his radio. Vanguard 2-3, Reaper 1-6 is at Rally Point Alpha. Pop green for positive ID. A brief flicker of green light from 50 meters ahead, infrared strobe. Got her, Morrison whispered. They moved carefully. When they reached the hide, Hendricks almost missed her, exceptional camouflage work. Then he saw her, female, mid-20s, dark hair matted with blood, left arm wrapped in bloody bandages, splinted, right leg similarly splinted, but her eyes were clear, and the M4 in her good hand was pointed at Morrison until she confirmed they were friendlies. About damn time, Carissa said, voice hoarse but steady. I was starting to think you guys got lost. Valdez moved forward. Let me see those injuries. Left arm compound fracture, right leg probable MCL tear, Carissa reported clinically. I've applied tourniquets and splints. I'm mobile but not fast. And we've got 12 hostiles at the crash site waiting to ambush anyone who comes looking. Hendricks liked her already. How's your ammunition? 68 rounds, 5.56, 16 rounds, 9mm. 1 smoke grenade. Good. You're going to need it. Hendricks pulled out his map. We've got 3 clicks to extraction. Enemy is between us and that location. We're fighting our way through. Morrison scanned the crash site. Count 12 hostiles, 3 on perimeter, 9 center, PKM machine gun and RPG. They're waiting for a rescue bird, Carissa said. Probably have man pads. You send a helicopter to this grid, they'll shoot it down. Which is why we're walking out, Hendricks said. Valdez, get her stabilized. We leave in 5. Valdez worked quickly, checking bandages and adjusting splints. He offered morphine, but she refused. Need to stay sharp, I can handle it. But when Valdez helped Carissa up, her leg gave out. Only his quick grab prevented her from falling. Okay, maybe I need a little help, Carissa admitted. Morrison moved to her other side. Between him and Valdez, they supported her weight. Standard movement, weapons out, Hendricks ordered. I've got Point Diaz rear security. We move quiet until contact is unavoidable, then we move fast and violent. Questions? No one spoke. Let's get our girl home. They made it 500 meters before the enemy found them. The patrol came from the north, 4 fighters moving with casual confidence. Hendricks saw them first and signaled freeze. The team went to ground, Carissa biting back a gasp as Morrison and Valdez lowered her. The patrol would pass within 20 meters. One fighter stumbled, his AK clattering against rock with a metallic clang that echoed through the night. The fighter froze, looking around. His eyes swept across where the Americans were concealed. For 3 heartbeats, no one moved. Then, the fighter's eyes locked onto Morrison. His mouth opened to shout. Hendricks fired first, a controlled pair that dropped the fighter. Morrison and Diaz engaged simultaneously. The entire patrol was down in under 3 seconds. Move, move, Hendricks hissed. Stealth was blown. Morrison and Valdez hauled Carissa upright and started moving fast. Despite her injuries, Carissa kept her M4 up, scanning flanks. Behind them, shouts erupted from the crash site. Flashlights swept through trees. AK-47s being charged echoed through the night. Contact rear, Diaz called. He dropped to one knee and began firing. Multiple hostiles closing fast. Hendricks spun, adding his fire. Through night vision, he saw at least 8 enemy fighters advancing, firing as they moved. Valdez, get her moving, Hendricks ordered. Morrison, with them. Diaz and I will slow these guys down. Morrison scooped Carissa into a fireman's carry and started running. Valdez took point. Hendricks and Diaz fell back by bounds, one moving while the other provided covering fire. The fighters were persistent, pushing forward despite casualties. Automatic fire stitched across the tree next to Hendricks's head, spraying him with bark. He rolled to new position and engaged the shooter, dropping him with a headshot at 40 meters. We need to break contact, Diaz shouted. They're flanking left. Hendricks saw it. The enemy was trying to envelop their position. Fall back to Morrison's position. Smoke and move. Diaz popped smoke that spewed white phosphorus. Under its cover, both Marines sprinted toward Morrison and Valdez. They found them in a shallow ravine. Morrison frantically tried to raise command while Valdez helped Carissa set up a firing position. No joy on comms, Morrison reported. Something's jamming frequencies. They've got electronic warfare capability, Carissa said. I couldn't get through earlier. We're on our own. Enemy fire was getting closer. Bullets snapped overhead and impacted ravine walls. Hendricks assessed, 5 shooters plus 1 wounded, against at least 15 enemy who knew the terrain. Outnumbered 3-1 with no support. They needed to change the calculus. How much C4 do we have? Hendricks asked. Morrison checked his pack. 2 blocks with remote detonators? An idea formed. Dangerous, possibly insane, but better than static defense. Give me 1 block, he said. Morrison, you're in command. Get everyone moving toward extraction point Bravo, 2 clicks southeast. I'll draw the enemy away and meet you there. Staff Sergeant, that's suicide. That's an order, Corporal. No room for argument. You've got the most important mission, getting her out. I'll buy you time. Now move. Before Hendricks could leave, Carissa grabbed his sleeve. Whatever you're planning, make it count. I didn't survive a helicopter crash just to watch good Marines die trying to save me. Ma'am, I don't plan on dying today, Hendricks said, but I do plan on making these assholes regret chasing us. He took the C4 and moved out. Behind him, Morrison organized the withdrawal. Hendricks headed opposite direction, making noise, leaving an obvious trail. The enemy fire shifted to follow him. He ran 300 meters, then found it. A narrow choke point where terrain funneled movement through a natural corridor. Perfect ambush site. Hendricks planted the C4 in the corridor's center, rigged the detonator with pressure release trigger, and covered it with dirt and leaves. Then, he ran another 100 meters and took up a firing position with clear view of the kill zone. The enemy came through in loose formation. Hendricks counted 12, more than he'd hoped, which meant Morrison's team would have fewer pursuers. He let them enter the kill zone, waiting until maximum number were within blast radius. Then, he fired into the detonator. The explosion was massive. A roiling ball of orange fire turned night into day for 3 seconds. The blast wave washed over Hendricks's position 100 meters away. Trees flattened. The sound rolled across the valley like thunder. When smoke cleared, 8 fighters were down, scattered across the kill zone. The remaining 4 were disoriented and scattered. He didn't wait. He ran, using chaos to put distance between himself and pursuit, heading southeast toward extraction. Behind him, the enemy began to regroup. They were angry now. Hendricks planned to exploit their mistakes. Morrison's team made better time without Hendricks drawing fire, but Carissa was still slowing them. Despite her toughness, injuries and blood loss were taking toll. She stumbled every few steps. "Contact front!" Diaz suddenly shouted. 3 enemy fighters had appeared ahead, a flanking element. Morrison and Valdez dropped Carissa into cover and engaged. The range was close, less than 30 meters. Carissa, even wounded, brought her M4 up and engaged the leftmost fighter. Her shots were clean despite being fired one-handed, dropping the target. The other 2 went down under Morrison and Valdez's fire. The engagement lasted less than 5 seconds. "We need to keep moving," Morrison said. But when he turned, Carissa was losing consciousness. The brief firefight had spiked her heart rate, and blood was seeping through bandages. "She's going into shock," Valdez said, checking her pulse. "We need to stop and stabilize her, or she's not making it." "We stop here, we die here," Morrison countered. "She stops here, she dies here," Valdez shot back. That's when they heard the distinctive crack of suppressed rifle in the distance. Hendricks was still fighting, still buying time. "Set up defensive perimeter," Morrison decided. "Valdez, you've got 5 minutes. Diaz, watch our 6. I'll cover approach." Valdez pulled out medical supplies and went to work, adjusting tourniquet, administering IV fluids to combat shock, injecting antibiotics. Morrison and Diaz scanned darkness through night vision, weapons ready. Distant gunfire continued, single shots from Hendricks, answered by multiple AK-47s. Running gun battle, constantly moving. "He's outnumbered at least 10-1, Diaz observed. "He'll keep it up as long as we need him to," Morrison said with certainty. "That's who he is." Carissa's eyes fluttered open as IV fluids took effect. She looked at Valdez with surprising clarity. "How much longer?" she asked. "To extraction. Maybe a click and a half if we move fast." "Then we move fast." Carissa tried to sit up, gasped at pain, but pushed through. "Your staff sergeant is out there buying us time. We don't waste it lying around." Morrison helped her up, impressed by her determination. "You heard the lady. Let's move." They pushed forward, Carissa between Morrison and Valdez, forcing herself to stay conscious through will. Diaz covered their rear. The extraction point was a small clearing marked as a potential helicopter landing zone. When they reached it, Morrison set up security while Valdez tried to raise command. The jamming was gone. They'd moved beyond its range. Valdez's transmission cut through. "Overwatch, this is Reaper 1-6 Bravo. We are at extraction point Bravo with wounded friendly. Requesting immediate air support and medevac. Over." Response came after tense pause. "Reaper 1-6 Bravo, Overwatch. Confirm you have Vanguard 2-3? "Affirmative. She's wounded but stable. We also have 1 Marine separated, engaging enemy forces, approximately 1 click northwest." Another pause. "Understood. Fast movers are inbound your location. ETA 12 minutes. Medevac is 15 minutes behind them. Can you hold?" Morrison looked at his team. 3 Marines, 1 wounded operator, low on ammunition, with unknown number of enemy in darkness. "We'll hold," he said into the radio. "Tell them to hurry." The 12 minutes felt like hours. Morrison positioned his team in a defensive circle around Carissa, who despite her injuries kept her M4 ready with her good hand. Every shadow could be an enemy. Every sound could be an attack beginning. "Movement, 2 o'clock, Diaz whispered, his weapon tracking toward the tree line. Morrison swung his rifle to cover the same sector. Through his night vision, he saw figures moving through the trees. Not trying to be stealthy, they were searching, calling to each other. "Hold fire unless they spot us," Morrison ordered quietly. "We don't want to give away our position if we don't have to." The enemy patrol moved closer. 6 fighters, weapons ready, scanning the forest. They were maybe 50 meters away and closing. Carissa's finger tightened on her trigger. Despite the IV line still running into her arm, despite the pain she had to be in, her weapon was steady. One of the enemy fighters stopped, looking directly toward their position. He raised his hand, signaling the others to stop. "They've spotted us," Valdez whispered. The fighter's mouth opened, probably to shout an alarm. Morrison fired first, a 3-round burst that dropped the fighter before he could make a sound. But the damage was done. The other 5 fighters scattered into cover and began returning fire. Muzzle flashes lit up the darkness. Bullets snapped through the air and impacted trees around the Americans' position. Morrison, Valdez, and Diaz returned fire with disciplined precision, each Marine controlling his sector. Carissa engaged targets with her M4, firing controlled bursts despite having to shoot one-handed. One enemy fighter who tried to flank their position fell to her accurate fire. "Contact left," Diaz called out. More enemy fighters were arriving, drawn by the sound of gunfire. What had been 6 enemies was now 10, then 12. "We're getting surrounded," Valdez shouted over the increasing volume of fire. Morrison knew they couldn't hold this position much longer. They were outnumbered, low on ammunition, and the enemy was coordinating a deliberate assault on their perimeter. Then he heard it, the beautiful sound of jet engines. "Heads down," Morrison shouted. "Fast movers inbound." The F-18 Super Hornets came in low and fast, their targeting systems having already marked enemy positions based on Morrison's GPS beacon. The 20mm cannons opened up with devastating precision, walking across the enemy positions in the tree line. The sound was deafening, rapid thunder that lasted several seconds and turned the forest into a killing field. When the jets pulled up and circled, the enemy fire had ceased completely. The fighters who'd been closing in on the American position were gone, eliminated by modern air power. "Dagger 1-1, Reaper 1-6, Bravo," Morrison transmitted. "Good hits. Area is clear. You just saved our lives." "Our pleasure, Reaper. Your ride is 2 minutes out. Recommend you pop smoke for the helo." Morrison pulled a smoke grenade and threw it into the clearing. Purple smoke billowed up, marking the landing zone for the incoming medevac. Hendricks was down to his last magazine when he heard the jets overhead. He popped his infrared strobe, marking his position. "Reaper 1-6, this is Dagger 1-1, a voice crackled. "We see your strobe, marking enemy positions now." "Dagger 1-1. Be advised, friendlies are 1 click southeast at Extraction Point Bravo. Everything northwest is hostile. Danger close." "Copy that, Reaper. Keep your head down." The jets made their run. Hendricks pressed himself into the ground as 20mm cannon fire tore through the forest with surgical precision. The cannon fire lasted 3 seconds, but felt eternal. When the jets pulled up, the forest was silent. No return fire, no movement. The enemy element pursuing Hendricks was erased. "Dagger 1-1, Reaper 1-6, good hits, area is clear." "Roger, Reaper, medevac is at your rally point, better move." Hendricks sprinted toward extraction, covering the click in what felt like record time despite exhaustion. When he burst into the clearing, Morrison had his rifle trained on the approach, then relaxed when he identified Hendricks. "Good to see you, Staff Sergeant," Morrison said with relief. "Good to be seen, Corporal." Hendricks moved to where Carissa sat against a tree, Valdez monitoring her vitals. "How's our patient?" "Still alive," Carissa said with weak smile. "Thanks to your team." "Thanks to you not giving up," Hendricks corrected. "You kept fighting when most would have quit. That's what got you through." The sound of helicopter rotors cut through night. A Black Hawk appeared over tree line, descending rapidly. Door gunners scanned the perimeter while medical personnel prepared to receive casualties. Morrison and Valdez carried Carissa to the bird and handed her up to flight medics. She looked back at the Marines who'd risked everything. "Thank you," she said, barely audible over rotors. "I owe you my life." "You don't owe us anything," Hendricks shouted back. "You're one of us. We don't leave our people behind." The helicopter lifted off, banking hard as it climbed away. Hendricks watched it disappear into darkness, carrying Carissa Bennett toward safety. A second helicopter landed moments later to extract the recon team. As they climbed aboard, Morrison looked at Hendricks. "Think we'll get in trouble for disobeying orders?" Hendricks grinned. "Absolutely. But it was worth it." 2 weeks later, Carissa Bennett sat in a hospital bed at Landstuhl Regional Medical Center in Germany, her left arm in a cast from hand to shoulder, her right leg elevated and wrapped. The compound fracture had required extensive surgery with pins and plates. The ligament damage meant months of physical therapy. But she was alive. The door opened and Staff Sergeant Mike Hendricks walked in, followed by his recon team. All 5 Marines were in dress uniforms. "We heard you were awake," Hendricks said. "Thought we'd check in." "I heard you guys got in serious trouble for coming after me," Carissa replied. "How bad?" Morrison grinned. "Let's just say we've been voluntold for some extra duty. But the CO also put us in for commendations, so it evens out." "You shouldn't have risked it," Carissa said, but her voice held no conviction. "Going after one wounded medic when you had a primary mission." "You're not just one wounded medic," Valdez interrupted firmly. "You're a combat medic who survived a helicopter crash, treated your own injuries under fire, evaded enemy forces for 18 hours while wounded, and still provided covering fire during extraction. That makes you worth saving." "Besides," Diaz added, "what kind of Marines would we be if we left someone behind just because it was tactically inconvenient?" Hendricks stepped forward and set something on her bedside table, a unit coin from the Marine Recon Battalion. "The team took a vote," he said. "We want you to have this. You might not be a Marine, but you've got the heart of one. And if you ever need anything at all, you know where to find us." Carissa picked up the coin with her good hand, feeling the weight of it. "Thank you," she said quietly. "For everything." "Thank you," Hendricks replied. "For not giving up. For staying in the fight. For reminding us why we do what we do." After the Marines left, Carissa sat alone, holding the coin, thinking about everything. The crash that should have killed her. The long hours alone and wounded in enemy territory. The moment she heard that radio call saying someone was coming. She thought about the choice Hendricks had made, to risk his entire team, to disobey orders, to do what was right instead of what was safe. The choice that saved her life. And she made a promise. When she recovered, when she got back to full duty, she would pay that forward. She would be the kind of operator who never left anyone behind, who took the risks necessary to bring people home. Because that's what real warriors did. They fought for each other. They sacrificed for each other. They never, ever gave up on each other, even when the odds were impossible, even when command said no, even when it would have been easier to walk away. Some debts could never be fully repaid, but Carissa Bennett would spend the rest of her career trying. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to subscribe for more amazing stories every day.